Hey there, everybody, and welcome to The Plant Path. I'm your host, Sajah Popham. Thanks so much for taking the time out of your life to join me here. And in this episode, I want to talk about some of the primary characteristics of medicinal plants that I see as having a strong correlation to the archetype of the sun, based on some of our correlations to some of the medical astrology associations of the sun and its governing sign in the zodiac, Leo. Now, I like talking about the sun because, it is the center of our solar system, and as such is the center of our psyche in the alchemical tradition, and we could say in the astrological tradition as well. The structure of the solar system, the way in which, the universe in which we reside is ordered, has a meaning to it, right? In the alchemical tradition, everything is seen to have meaning, from, the way a plant grows to the nature of a mineral or a metal. The qualities and characteristics of nature are reflective of the qualities and characteristics of the human organism down here in the terrestrial realm. But according to alchemy, the same is true of the celestial realm, right? The above, the heavens, that the structure of the way our creation is, that the structure of that solar system is reflective of the structure of our own psyche. And the sun being at the center of our solar system, being that which everything orients around, right? It is the gravitational center of everything, right? All the planets orbit around the sun as the center of the system. So too is it in the nature of our psyche. And so the sun really represents the gravitational center of the psyche. It is, in many ways, we can think of it as our essence. It is the core of our being. It is the little bit of light that exists within us. And accordingly, some would think of the sun as, in a lot of ways, our consciousness, the light of consciousness. It is our connection to the center of all things. And the way in which we commonly see that is that it represents, in a lot of ways, our personality. Then this is why in the West we see more of a sun-oriented system of astrology, which is interesting to note that in other traditions, the sun actually isn't quite as important. In Jyotish, the way it's been explained to me is that the moon, in a lot of ways, is seen as a bit more important in some aspects than the sun. But here in the tropical astrology, at least modern tropical astrology, there's great importance placed on the sun. Obviously, as we see in pop astrology, the inclusion of, say, sun sign dynamics and I was about to say in the Sunday paper, but is there a Sunday paper anymore? Do people read newspapers anymore? For those of you that may not be aware, newspapers, there were this thing in the ancient days where people would print words on paper and they would deliver it to your door, in some instances every day, and people would hold that in their hands and they would read it. I'm teasing, of course. I'm sure many of you know what a newspaper is, but it's kind of funny, that my dad actually was a business columnist for the Tacoma News Tribune newspaper. So it's funny that a newspaper is like a prehistoric thing at this point, it seems like. Anyways, sun sign astrology, we play with a lot of importance on the sun. And I think there's good reason behind that, although I think it can, in some instances, overly simplify the astrological tradition. And there is, of course, much more complexity. We are much more than our sun sign, but it is important. They're all important, right? They all represent a fundamental attribute of our psyche, of the structure of who we are. So in medical astrology, the sun is reflective of these more psychological attributes of the sun. So in a similar way that in the psyche, it's the gravitational center, it's the core of who we are. We could say it's our spirit. Within the body, it is the center of the body. So if you think of the cross, you put your arms out and you, in the horizontal here, and then vertically here, it all meets in the middle in the heart. And the heart is predominantly ruled by the sun in medical astrology. The heart, the cardiovascular system as a whole, is associated along with the governing sign of the sun being Leo, the fifth sign of the zodiac, our fixed fire sign, which exists, at least in the northern hemisphere, in the middle of summer when the sun is at its peak and when it's at its most fixed, its strongest phase. So the heart and cardiovascular system are central rulerships of the sun. The sun also represents we could say, our vitality, the core, the vital force that we have within our system. How much vitality are we innately born with? So in some ways, it has to do with, I wouldn't say the Constitution as a whole. And I'm going to do another post on the constitutional dynamics. I believe I'm going to be publishing that one in the next week or so. But it has to do with, in a way, your constitutional strength. How much vitality do you have? Do you have a robust constitution, or do you have a little bit of a weaker constitution? And there's this dynamic with vitality and its connection to heat. So if we think of the vital force, like vital signs, just in medicine, you think of what are your vital signs? Well, it's respiration, your air element. It's having a heartbeat, your fire element. It's the ability to have motion, movement, with the earth element. And so that heat is reflective of the solar aspect of vitality. And so we could say that the sun has to do with the quality of the vital force and the distribution of heat throughout the system. And of course, that is achieved through the movement of blood. The blood flow is the distributor of heat and vitality throughout the system. And this is where we see a connection between the other, we would say, yang or dynamic or masculine oriented planets of the sun, Mars, and Jupiter, whereas the sun is the heart cardiovascular system as a whole. Jupiter is the arterial circulation, and Mars is the blood flowing through the whole system. And Mars, of course, has a lot to do with heat. The sun has to do with heat, but the sun is more of like a warm, radiant heat, whereas Mars is more of an aggressive heat. In many instances, it's more pathological heat, inflammation, irritation, excitation of the tissues, and things like that. But it is through Mars is like the carrier of that solar heat and vitality throughout the system through the blood. So this is some of the major medical associations with the sun. So when we see people with circulatory system issues, heart problems, poor distribution of the blood, these commonly are associated with the sun. Poor vitality, poor distribution of vitality, people that don't have a lot of vital strength, which can manifest as, chronic fatigue, a degree of immunosuppression, like not immunosuppression, but more deficient immunity. So this is another way the sun and Mars kind of work together. Mars rules the immune system, but a lot of the state of our immune system is very much so dependent on our vitality, right? That if you are worn out, run down, not sleeping well, stressed out, just not very vital, you're going to tend to have a bit of a lowered immune response. You're going to be much more prone to just getting sick. You're going to get more sick easily. Whereas people with good, strong vitality, someone can sneeze right in their face and, they're not going to be as likely to get sick because they have strong vitality, they have strong immunity. So I don't necessarily think of the sun ruling immunity per se, but there is a connection between the solar vitality and the general strength of the immune system. So people with a deficiency of the sun tend to have, fatigue, lower energy, lower vitality, can have lowered immunity. They're obviously the sun in medical astrology is warm and dry energetically. And so when there's a deficiency of the sun, it can be cold, right? And we see that with the opposite. So oftentimes, to really understand medical astrology, you have to understand not just the individual signs, but their relationships to the other signs. So when the sun or Leo is deficient, that could mean there is a potential expression of excess of the opposite sign because they're like a teeter-totter, right? One goes up, the other goes down, which is Aquarius. And Aquarius governs peripheral circulation, cold hands and feet. In the northern hemisphere, Aquarius is the middle of winter, the fixed air of winter, the cold, biting wind that causes you to kind of tense up, seize up. And Aquarius classically is a relatively lower vitality sign. It's not uncommon for people with, now I'm not saying people with their sun in Aquarius, I'm saying people with a predominance of Aquarius in their constitution can tend to have a bit of lower vital force. So, with all that said, I want to talk about 4 of my favorite solar herbs and kind of covering 4 main attributes of the sun as it expresses itself within the human organism. So I want to talk about warmth, I want to talk about heart, I want to talk about vitality, and I want to talk about the spirit. And what I see is 4 of my favorite herbs that I think encompass these different attributes of the solar archetype very nicely. Hey, before I get into my top 4 sun-ruled medicinal plants, I want to make sure that you know about something that's happening right now. Over at evolutionaryherbalism.com, we are running our 100% free Astro Herbalism mini course. This is a super in-depth 3-part workshop series where I am outlining for you the fundamental tenets between the connection of traditional medical astrology and modern clinical herbal medicine. We're breaking down in there the connections between the planets and the signs to your anatomy and your physiology and pathology, and how the herbs connect to the planets and embody their qualities and their actions and energetics and therapeutic principles, to even how to look at your chart and find some insights into your constitution, into your health, into your potential predispositions for disease, and how you can prevent those from manifesting by working with herbs holistically. But it is only happening now for the next week. So be sure to head on over to evolutionaryherbalism.com, sign up for the Astro Herbalism mini course. It just takes a name and an email. The first 2 lessons are live now at the publishing of this video. The next one is going to be coming out tomorrow for the full 3-part workshop. So evolutionaryherbalism.com, sign up for the Astro Herbalism mini course. I hope to see you in there. I'm answering all of your questions, all your comments in there myself personally, and it would be truly honored to have you in there. So with that, let us continue forth, and I will share with you my top 4 favorite sun-ruled herbs right now. So let's start by talking about heart. As I said, the sun is the major ruler of the heart and the cardiovascular system. And what better ruler of the heart and the cardiovascular system in herbal form than Hawthorn? Crataegus monogyna is the main species used. Of course, we've got Crataegus douglasii and other Crataeguses, but the monogyna is the main Hawthorn species used. Now, if you look up old astrology books or alchemy books, oftentimes they'll say, oh, Crataegus is ruled by Mars. I always thought that was interesting because it's such a heart remedy. Like anyone that knows anything about herbs and has studied Hawthorn you say, what's the number one heart herb? Most everyone's going to say Hawthorn, right? This is like our heart trophorestorative par excellence, right? This is our mainstay, powerful, gentle, yet powerful herb for the heart and really the entire cardiovascular system. Now, one of the reasons why I think the old text might say Hawthorn ruled by the sun, it might be based on morphology. So they see a bright red berry and they see thorns and they think Mars. Okay, Mars is sharp, prickly, intense. It can cut you, it can stab you, it can draw blood. And Mars, of course, is the red planet. But when we really look, I don't think correlating a plant to a planet just based on morphological characteristics is sufficient. It doesn't build a good enough case for why that herb would be associated with that planet. Now, that being said, I do think Hawthorn is an interesting herb in that it is what I might think of as a Mars eliminator, meaning that the berries and the flowers, to an extent too, of Hawthorn are powerfully antioxidant, cooling to heat and inflammation and irritation in the vasculature, right? So vascular oxidation, weak capillary beds, inflammatory stress in the cardiovascular system. We could say that's like Mars attacking the sun, or Mars in maybe harsh aspect to Leo, causing heat, inflammation, damage to the vasculature. So to me, Hawthorn is a really primo remedy here for addressing Mars attacking the sun, or Mars harshly aspecting Leo and causing problems. But this herb is, tastes sour. Many of our sour tasting herbs, it's a berry, right? So many of our sour tasting berries tend to be cooling to heat and inflammation and irritation. This is like a food. This is one of those herbs that is between a medicinal property and a food. Meaning that you can't expect to take a dropper full of Hawthorn and that magically all of your heart problems just go away. This is an herb that you generally, especially with people with really bad cardiovascular issues or predisposition towards it, maybe they've got atherosclerosis or they got high cholesterol and they got heart problems, things like that. Usually one has to be taking Hawthorn daily, multiple times a day, consistently, inadequate dosages for 6 months to really for it to build up within the system and to really start taking effect. So it's like a food. It's a slow acting, long-term use herb, but it's building the strength of the heart. Right? It's antioxidant, it's inflammation modulating, it's what we would refer to as a cardiotonic, or what I like to think of as a cardiovascular trophorestorative, meaning that it's restoring the structure and function in a lot of ways, the proper structure and function of the heart and the vasculature. It helps bring more tone to the heart muscle, making the contractile power of the heart more efficient, more effective. It improves the elasticity of the vasculature so that it expands and contracts with the beating of the heart. But where I also see Hawthorn being very interesting in its solar association is what we might think of as the Chinese concept of the heart, or the TCM heart, which in a lot of ways really is the mind. So it's said in Chinese medicine that the heart stores the Shen. Well, the Shen is your spirit. And in this context, your spirit is oftentimes reflected in the state of your mind. This is why a lot of times people that are really maybe anxious or nervous, have hard time sleeping at night, we have what we might think of as more of a nervous, anxious kind of disposition. They have a disturbed Shen, or maybe they even have really bad dreams at night, not sleeping well, waking up a lot. It's a disturbed Shen. It's something of the heart. And Hawthorn, interestingly enough, is very useful for people. I actually consider it a nervine. I think it's really useful for calming down people that might be anxious, nervous, kind of flighty, like their vital force kind of flutters up and out. The mind has a certain stress to it. I always say that the Hawthorn person, it's like the mind is overriding the heart. Like they have a hard time following their heart. And we hear that statement, follow your heart, follow your heart. Well, what does that mean? It means like quit overthinking everything. It means that that the heart is not just a pump, that the heart is actually in a lot of ways the seat of consciousness. It is the seat of the spirit. It is to follow the heart means to follow a deeper sense of what is right action, what is the kind of following a moral compass. What is morality? What is right? What is wrong? What is good? What is evil? What is a proper way to conduct oneself in this life? What does it mean to live a virtuous life? And where does all of that come from? Well, it doesn't come from the mind, or it doesn't come from science. It comes from something greater than the self, I would argue. I would argue that it comes from God. It comes from the Creator. It comes from something greater than the self. And that is, we connect to that through our heart. And to me, Hawthorn is really a useful way of going about that. And the astrological reflection of that would be the sun. Right? The sun, it's the center of all things, the center of our solar system, the center of the psyche, the spirit. And so, of course, spirit is another category here. We'll talk about a separate herb there for that. But I think because Hawthorn works on the heart, it touches the Shen to calming. This is why Hawthorn extract, actually a very strong, like solid extracts of Hawthorn, can be very useful for children with cognitive difficulty. You know, conventionally speaking, they might be diagnosed with ADD or ADHD. I don't really know if that, I don't really know if I believe that's actually a disease per se. I think that might be, I think there's other things going on there that I wouldn't call necessarily a disease, but Hawthorn can be really helpful in that way. So, that's Hawthorn. That would be the heart. Now, on to our second category of sun-ruled herbs, warmth. Well, you might think warmth, what's the big deal? Well, as I said earlier, warmth, very important because warmth is a vital sign, right? It's one thing that differentiates a living body from a dead body, right? A living body is warm, a dead body's cold. And that is because the solar force, the spirit, has left the body, and with it departs that heat. So heat is an expression of life. Heat is an expression of vitality. And of course, we don't want too much of it, right? Because too much heat, like too much of anything, can be damaging, but we want warmth. And one of my favorite classic sun-ruled herbs here is Angelica, Angelica. This would be our garden variety and European Angelica. Like to make sure to clarify that because there are lots of Angelicas out there, right? There's, I think, like 3 or 4 that I know of, probably more Angelicas used in Chinese medicine. There's wild Angelicas. I think there's 3 different species of Angelica, probably more, that grow around me living here in the Pacific Northwest. We've got like the Angelica arguta that likes to grow up in the Cascades. We've got a coastal variety, the Angelica hendersonii, Henderson's Angelica. And they're all a little bit different, but here I'm speaking more to your classic European garden variety Angelica, Angelica, which really has that quite pleasant, slightly bitter, aromatic property that tastes very reminiscent of fennel. It has a very fennel-y flavor, very pleasant. Angelica, nice, warming bitter, an aromatic bitter that actually has a little bit of a moistening property to it as well. It's not quite as dry as many of our other warming herbs, which is one of the reasons why I like it. Now, the way I understand the property of Angelica is that when you take it, the property kind of works in stages. So I see it begins here in the solar plexus, right? Not the nerve solar plexus, but just this general area. You take it, you feel it warm the core, warm the gut. So it brings warmth and vitality here to the digestive system. So it's a very good digestive stimulant as a bitter, as an aromatic carminative, very useful for the digestive system, but it builds that warmth there. And from there, that warmth, almost like you're building a fire in the core, and then that heat starts to radiate outwards from there, out through the rest of the body, where it has a stimulant property. Now, when I say stimulant, I don't want you to think about coffee kind of stimulant. I want you to think of circulatory stimulant. It's bringing warmth and circulation and blood throughout the system. So it warms blood out to the hands and to the feet. It brings blood up into the head. I personally I haven't heard a lot of herbalists talk about Angelica this way. To me, I think of it as a bit of a nootropic agent in that it can bring a bit of blood up to the head and kind of help cognitive function. And I'm referring more to, like, we have prepared a spagyric essence of Angelica, so it's very volatile, very aromatic. And boy, when I've taken that, it's like bing, like I really feel mentally clear, focused, the senses feel kind of opened up. But it's moving that blood, warming the periphery. We see it having an impact on the respiratory system as a stimulant expectorant. So the volatile oils really open up the lungs, open up the breathing, can be used quite nicely in cough formulas, warms the uterus, and can really aid with some menstrual difficulties. That has a bit of an antispasmodic effect, so kind of relax and warm cold uterus, maybe pour blood flow to the uterus, amenorrhea, or just stagnant, clotty kind of menses. So it's bringing, again, like to me, the theme of Angelica is that it's bringing warmth and vitality, right? It's bringing that warmth and blood throughout the system. It does it to the GI, it does it to the uterus, it does it to the lungs. It's bringing that blood throughout the system, and as such, distributing warmth and distributing vitality. I absolutely love Angelica. And in a lot of ways too, even though we don't think of the sun as ruling the lungs, obviously that's Gemini and Mercury. It doesn't rule the uterus. That's more the moon and Cancer. It doesn't rule the digestive system, right? It's like the moon rules the stomach, and Virgo rules the small intestine, and Scorpio rules the colon, and right. So it's like the sun doesn't rule any of those systems, but the sun, in the same way that the light of the sun at the center of our solar system is shining its light, and as the earth turns, the sun touches every part of the earth, so too is it in our body. So that the warmth and the vitality of the heart and the center is shining outward, is radiating outwards and touching every part of the body. So in a lot of ways, the sun really impacts the whole person because the circulation of blood is universal throughout the body. And Angelica generally helps to stimulate that, and through that bring that warmth and vitality. So very good for cold, weak, deficient folks. People with poor digestion is one way that I really like to use Angelica. They don't, and if you think of this, if you don't digest and absorb the nutrients from your food, how's that going to affect your vitality? It's pretty hard to be vital if you can't really absorb the nutrition from your food very well. If you're all backed up in there, Angelica is very nice to get all those digestive secretions going, stimulating HCl, pancreatic enzymes. It's going to be it's bitter, so it's going to get the bile moving a bit. It's going to bring, get all the secretions going. We might call it a prokinetic, meaning that it's helping with the downward bearing energy of the digestion, which is the direction you want it to move. So sometimes for those upward moving things, in the GI, Angelica can be very useful for, especially things like SIBO, where you're getting colonic bacteria going up into the small intestine. I really like Angelica there to kind of help reestablish that downward bearing quality. And in that way, I wouldn't call it laxative per se. It's not going to make you like go run to the toilet in an emergency state, like you get with some Senna or Cascara, but it can be very useful for people with poor, slow, sluggish transit time and things like that. I really love Angelica for the digestive system. I still use fennel a lot, but in a lot of instances where I would use fennel, I actually reach for Angelica these days quite a bit more, and I really love this remedy a lot. So really great example of the warmth aspect of a solar plant. Next herb is vitality. And for this herb, I selected ashwagandha. Now, there could be arguments made for ashwagandha as being ruled by Mars as well. I would consider ashwagandha to have some associations with Mars. It's very rich in iron. Mars rules iron. You take enough ashwagandha over a period of time, it will build your iron levels up. I actually had a client, or not a client, but a student the other day that I was talking to in a webinar, and she was saying that she had been taking ashwagandha powder for quite some time and went to her doctor, got some blood work, and the doctor was like, whoa, your iron levels are too high. Like, what are you doing? Like, how are you getting your iron levels up? And after talking for a while, I was like, oh, that ashwagandha powder, yeah, don't do it like that for too long unless you need it, because it will increase your iron levels. So I think there's some arguments to be made for ashwagandha related to Mars, but I also like it for the sun, right? This is a nice, gently warming herb. It's not hot by any means, but it's gently warming. Withania somnifera, right? It's interesting in that it's an adaptogen, so it's used to help the body to adapt to stressors, physiological stressors, psychological stressors. As an adaptogen, classically it was defined as a rasayana in Ayurvedic medicine, which is a rejuvenative tonic. We see that it has that effect, a rejuvenative effect on the nerves. It has a rejuvenative effect on the HPA axis, or the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which in some ways would be a little bit more of a case for Mars as well. But I like the solar aspect of ashwagandha because it's building of the vitality in a way that's not overly stimulating. If you were to take a whole bunch of like red Asian ginseng or rhodiola or eleutherococcus or even schisandra, if you take those herbs in really high amounts, they can be very, very stimulating. I like ashwagandha because it's actually a little bit calming. It's not, I don't really think of it as sedating by any means, but it does kind of get you on an even keel. And that really is the state of the sun, is like a vital, alert awakeness, but calm, that I think is the optimal, it's the optimal state of being to be in a lot of ways. So it's working on that core vitality. So the way I see ashwagandha is that it's working on the solar core vitality. And then through that, it has all these kind of trickle down effects on the Mars aspects of the body. So through working on vitality, then that's reflected in the HPA axis. It's reflected on building and nourishing the blood. It's reflected on as an immune tonic, right? Or we might think of it as an amphoteric, meaning that it has the intelligence to kind of alter or adjust the immune response to be essentially more optimal, right? So it can be utilized for people that are really weak and deficient with their immune system. I'm going to build them up. But it can also be useful for people that might have some degree of immunological excess, hypersensitivities, allergies, autoimmune type patterns, which more often than not, an autoimmune pattern, there's kind of aspects of deficient low immunity and aspects of excess immunity cycling between the two, or even sometimes happening at the same time. So ashwagandha, amphoteric, meaning it has this regulating effect on the immune function, which gives it a really excellent application for a lot of those immune dysregulated type patterns and conditions, which again, as I said earlier, can be an expression of weakened vitality. So I really love ashwagandha as an herb that, to me, working with it over time, and I've used ashwagandha myself personally quite a bit, so I feel like I've got a pretty good just personal experience with this herb used as a simple. And the way that I understand it is that it's just slowly nourishing and building up that vital strength that to me is very much so reflective of the sun. So love ashwagandha as a nice representative of the vitality aspect of the sun. And lastly, we have St. John's wort, Hypericum perforatum, as a reflection of the spirit of the sun. So when I say spirit, it's important to know that for me, the term spirit, I use it more in the sense, like within this context, I use it in the sense of the alchemical understanding of spirit, which, as I said earlier, is the spirit, or the mercury principle in alchemy, is composed of the air and the water element. And in an elemental composition of the body, the air reflects the mental state, the psychology, and the water represents the state of feeling, the state of emotion. And so Mercury, our spirit, is really the psychoemotional layer of being, which is the more fixed reflection of the sulfur part of the self, which is the soul, which we would say is kind of more of the essence. And so, or the consciousness. So St. John's wort, very psychological remedy, right? I mean, this is a remedy used to treat psychological problems for a very long time. Paracelsus talked about it in the early 1500s. A lot of the old herbalists talked about St. John's wort for a wide variety of psychological struggles. Of course, its claim to fame these days is in the treatment of mild to moderate states of depression or melancholia, which everybody thinks of St. John's wort as an herbal antidepressant. I really don't like that word, antidepressant, in relationship to a plant, because it just gives this impression of, oh, I'm depressed. If I take this herbal antidepressant, my depression is just magically going to go away. And for anyone that's been depressed and used St. John's wort, it's sometimes like not quite that easy. Of course, I think St. John's wort should be used in the context of a greater protocol and lifestyle and dietary and other herbs and formulas and things like that. Rarely we're just going to use straight St. John's wort alone for depression, but the way it works is really on that spirit. The way I see it is that the St. John's wort, it is like think of those little yellow flowers of St. John, those little rays of sunshine that happen to flower right around St. John's Day, which is right around the summer solstice here in the Northern Hemisphere. The greatest solar force of the year is at its peak. St. John's wort is gathering that solar force. And to me, when you take it, it's imbuing that solar force into the body, into the heart, into the mind, and uplifting the spirit. So it's very, very useful. It's actually a nervous system remedy. Like if I was to really classify St. John's wort, I think of it as a nervous system remedy, and I actually think of it as a liver remedy. That's one aspect of St. John's wort that's really commonly overlooked, but this herb like seriously impacts liver metabolism. That's why it is contraindicated with a number of pharmaceuticals, because St. John's wort is acting on a certain drug detoxification pathway in the liver, or not just drug detoxification, but just detox pathway in the liver called the cytochrome P450 system, which determines how quickly or slowly a drug, in this instance talking about interactions, is metabolized. So it can render a drug more effective or less effective depending on how that drug is metabolized. So that's why you have to be pretty careful with St. John's wort with certain medications. And that's a liver action, actually. So I always like to make sure to acknowledge that St. John's wort is really working on the liver. Now, one differential that I really like that I learned from David Winston was some differentials of depression, whereby he classifies more of a hepatic depression, like a liver type depression, where it's almost like a higher energy state depression. It's not like a true depression where you're just like, oh, like can't get out of bed and I don't want to do anything. And you're just like heavy and sad and weighted down and depressed, right? The hepatic depression is more of a higher energy state depression where you're depressed, but you're kind of pissed off about it, right? You're kind of irritable and angry and frustrated. He notes that St. John's wort is very good for a hepatic-based depression, also very useful for a GI-based depression where there is depressive symptoms coupled with digestive symptoms. And it is worth noting that melancholia, depression, can be a primary sign of a food intolerance. I've seen people whose depression really lifts off from, for example, eliminating gluten. Gluten, I think, is a main one to look at there. Sugar can also be a major depressive, I'm not going to say cause, but I would say contributing factor. I've heard cases of people that were severely depressed. They cut out all sugar. Their depression went away. They got back on sugar. The depression came back. They cut the sugar out. The depression went away. So it was like very correlative, where the sugar was clearly a major contributing factor. So I love St. John's wort as a solar force to uplift the spirit, to attend to the heart, in a way, to me, St. John's wort, it's like it protects your mind. It protects your mind from that part of yourself that wants to drag you down, from the inner pessimist, the inner void. Anyone that's ever struggled with depression knows that there can be a part of the self that kind of wants to be there in a way, that kind of revels in it, that there's a voice inside that wants to drag you down. And I think St. John's wort is almost like a protective mechanism from the darkness that can infiltrate the mind. And this is where you see, if you read some old herbals, you'll see St. John's wort is an herb used to, protection from witchcraft, would be a major use of that herb. Protection from malevolent spirits or hexes or curses or people that are projecting jealousy or envy or, giving you the evil eye or things like that. Protect you from things like that, which I think is interesting in relationship to its more, we could say those would be kind of esoteric virtues of the herb, but that esoteric virtue really kind of translates into its physiological virtue too, in regards to the way it affects the gut, the way it affects the liver, the way it uplifts the senses and the mind and the heart and the consciousness, and the way it works through the nervous system. This is one of our key herbs for nerve pain. Any manner of nerve pain, St. John's wort, very specific. This is one of our main remedies for puncture wounds. This is why its species is perforatum, or a perforation. So puncture wounds, St. John's wort, very specific for those puncture wounds. And that would include like venomous bites too. So those types of puncture wounds. And that signature is in the leaf too. You hold up the leaf to the light and you can see all those perforations in the leaf. Some people say that would be like a signature for a perforation in the skin, like a physical puncture wound. But going back to kind of those esoteric virtues, some say, oh, that could also be likened to an etheric puncture wound kind of in your aura, so to speak, and kind of sealing that up, that protection from the light of the sun, protection from the Spirit, from the Holy Spirit is one of the ways that we like to think of St. John's Wort. So those are some of my 4 favorite herbs that I correlate to the sun when we're talking about 4 primary aspects of the sun in medical astrology, but also a little, maybe sprinkled in a little bit of the esoteric aspects of it too. Talking warmth, heart, vitality, and spirit. These are 4 of my favorites. Of course, there's a lot more that could be said about these medicinal plants, but I just wanted to share some of the correspondences, the way I understand them and their relationship to the sun. Of course, this is not a comprehensive discussion on how these herbs are used therapeutically, but these are some of the ways that I consider them in their relationship to the sun. Hopefully you find that interesting, useful, beneficial in some way, shape, or form, and just illustrates some of the principles of medical astrology, the aspects of corresponding plants to planets, and the art of unifying clinical herbalism with medical astrology. So thanks so much for joining me in this episode of The Plant Path. Don't forget that the Astro Herbalism mini course is happening right now. We have released lesson 2. Lesson 3 is on its way at the date of releasing this video, so be sure to check it out now while you can. Head over to evolutionaryherbalism.com. Sign up for the Astro Herbalism mini course now while you can. It's going to be open up for another week. It is free, totally free workshop series. It's awesome. It's amazing. Be sure to go over there and check it out. Link in the show notes in the description. Of course, if you're watching or listening anywhere other than our website, you should probably head over to evolutionaryherbalism.com. Sign up for our email list so you get updates on all of our fresh new content that we are publishing. If you're on YouTube, hey, like the video, subscribe to the channel. It really does help us out a lot. So for those of you that have liked and subscribed, I do really appreciate it. But I know there's a lot of you that watch the videos, but you don't subscribe to the channel. So just hit that little notification bell and subscribe to the channel. We really appreciate it. If you're listening on the podcast, hey, if you don't mind taking a minute or two and just leaving a 5-star review if you enjoy the podcast, it really does help us with algorithms and all the way internets works and all that. Once again, I do really appreciate your support of the channel. It really means a lot. Thank you for listening thank you for listening to what I have to share. I do really appreciate it. And I hope you all enjoy the Astro Herbalism mini course. And thanks so much for tuning into The Plant Path. Until the next one, take care and be well.